I'm Akua Leslie Hope, an editor, publisher, poet, short fiction writer, speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca Keepers of the Western Door, and the area currently called the Southern Finger Lakes region of New York State, where it is shockingly and atypically 90 degrees. We're here for creating a chapbook, how to. And I'll just restate what our purpose together is, from selecting poems to include, to options for publication and distribution, a conversation on the nuts and bolts of creating a chapbook for your speculative poetry. And we've got three fabulous panelists. Angela Acosta is a bilingual Latina poet and PhD candidate, I'm so impressed, in Iberian Studies at Ohio State University. She's a 2022 Dream Foundry Contest for Emerging Writers finalist, 2022 Somos un Escrito Extra Fiction Contest honorable mention, Riesling, and Best of the Net nominee. Her speculative poetry have or will appear in On Spec, Eye on the Telescope, Eye to the Telescope, I should know that, Radon Journal, Space and Time, and Shoreline of Infinity. She's author of Summoning Space Travelers and Fourth Generation Chicano Unicorn, both 2023 publications. Welcome, Angela. So nice to see you. Andrew Najberg, and I hope I'm saying Najberg correctly. Am I, Andrew?
It's Nyberg, actually.
Oh, it's Nyberg, and I didn't get to ask you ahead of time, so I'll start again. Andrew Nyberg is the author of two forthcoming novels, Galatak and The Mobius Door. His collection of poems, The Goats Have Taken Over the Barracks, and the chapbook, Easy to Lose, were both published by Finishing Line Press. His poems have appeared in dozens of journals, including North American Review, Asheville Poetry Review, Another Chicago Magazine, Yemisi, and Cimarron Review. His short fiction has or will appear in Prose Online, Psychopomp Review, Bookends Review, The Colored Lens, Utopia Science Fiction, and Gateway Review. Wendy Van Camp, well known to me, is the poet laureate. I just want to pause on that. The poet laureate for the city of Anaheim, California. Her work is influenced by cutting-edge technology, astronomy, and daydreams. A graduate of the Ad Astra Speculative Fiction Workshop, Wendy is a nominated finalist for the Elgin Award, a Pushcart Prize, and Dwarf Stars Awards. Her poems, stories, and articles have appeared in Starlight, Sci-Fi Coup Review, The Junction, Quantum Visions, and other literary journals. Author and illustrator of The Planets, a sci-fi coup poetry collection. Wendy is also editor of the annual anthologies Eccentric Orbits, an anthology of science fiction poetry. Are we up to number 4 now?
I'm on number 6. Well,
Number 6?
well, no, I'm sorry, you're right. Eccentric Orbits is number 4.
Try to keep count. And Anaheim Poetry Review. Find her at the eponymous wendyvancamp.com. So welcome panelists, all of whom have great familiarity with the subject, and hopefully it will be wonderful for you, our 16 attendees. Let's start with definitions. Okay, so we all start at the same place, and I'll go around, and I'll start with Angela. How do you define a chapbook?
Yeah, I think of a chapbook as kind of a poet's calling card of a small selection of poems. The number of poems can vary, the number of pages can vary, but usually small, under 30 pages of poems is what I think of as a chapbook.
Andrew?
Yeah, it's about the same. 30 pages or less is fairly standard, I think. I've seen some folk define it as low as like 20 or 25, but otherwise, I think, maybe it has to have more than like 10 pages or something like that. But otherwise, it's it's a lot of it's a lot of the way that we present and market ourselves.
Wendy.
Well, I agree with the length, and that's usually the main definition of a chapbook versus a collection. But for me, it's also something that's a little more less formal, perhaps. Usually, chapbooks are made by the poets themselves. They're used more for marketing and for introducing their work than it being considered an actual publication. Although, if you do go through channels to create a bound book, a lot of times a chapbook can be considered a quote unquote book. So I think it varies more on how you put together your final project, whether it's more that casual marketing thing versus an actual book.
Okay, so I hear people making a distinction between a chapbook and an actual book. Are you all in agreement with that?
There's a fine line. I think it can go either way, but essentially I think a chapbook is less formal.
And you talked about marketing, almost everybody. Anyone want to expand on that? Andrew, maybe? What do you mean when you say marketing?
So, you know, one thing that's nice about having a more informal, shorter grouping of poems is that it makes it, I think it's easy to create a representation of what you're doing right now. And then periods of your writing in the past. It's a simple way to present short little cross sections that will give people a clear impression of what your work is about or was about at a specific period of time.
Hmm. When do you decide to create a chapbook? Angela?
I think that's, depending on the poet and where they're at. I think a lot of folks, I'm coming out of the college poetry writing scene, and a lot of folks wanting to get their start by putting together a chapbook and sharing some of the poems they've been workshopping in poetry courses or in groups. Sometimes people will see calls for submissions for chapbooks and full-length collections, and that can kind of be the push you need to submit your work and maybe get it published. But I think there's always some sort of impetus, whether that's the theme, you have a lot of poems ready to go, you want to share your poems with other people. I think there's a variety of reasons.
How about you, Wendy?
Well, to be honest, I haven't really created a chapbook of my work at all. I started with a full poetry collection because I really wanted to have an actual book ready. And it was because I was applying to be a poet laureate and they required me to have a book of poetry. And so I went, darn, I better get one done. So that's what I did. Um, but I have since seen the value of chapbooks, and I'm kind of planning on doing maybe one a year, maybe not this year, but starting next year, and making it a more informal representation of my books. There's also markets that are geared specifically for chapbooks or zines, and my collection really doesn't fit in there because it is a formal book. But chapbooks I could take to these venues, and it would be beneficial to me to get the word out about myself as a poet. So, yeah, I think there's really no reason to start a chapbook unless you want to do one, to be perfectly honest. If you're out reading a lot, having a tiny book to hand out or sell for just a few dollars at your venue is very useful to have. If you have a table and you're starting to table your work as an author and poet, then having these smaller things to hand out. I know some poets have just put them out as just little giveaways. They're so small that and very inexpensive to make, they consider it as almost like a business card with
Let's put
examples
a
of their work.
let's put a pin in the idea of expense, because I want to
Yes.
return to that later. And I want Andrew's thoughts on when do you decide to create a chapbook? Everybody keeps mentioning marketing, but marketing has these different um, colors for people. So
So I'll take a different angle on it. I've written, my initial chapbook was something I wrote as I was wrapping up grad school, and it's almost kind of like I think it's a pretty solid little book, but it's almost kind of silly. It's in its inception. During the time, I was very overworked and stressed out, and I discovered there's a frog living on my front porch, and the whole chapbook is a collection of conversations that I imagined with the frog. Um,
That
so
sounds lovely.
Cute.
and it was a blast to write. I loved it. It's always, it's something that'll always mean a lot to me. But here's the thing: all of those poems were pretty connected to each other. But if I tried to sustain that as a full-length collection, I think I would have strained the idea, overburdened it, and it wouldn't have had the weight or quality that I was going for. To me, I actually like to think of a chapbook almost like the novella of the poetry world, where it's a form very suited to concentrated ideas that can't be told in a single poem. So the chapbooks I've worked on are always very densely themed, but they're also pursuing a theme that if I were to push it too far, it would start to feel like a gimmick instead of a genuine piece of craft.
And you connect us seamlessly to the next thing I was going to ask about, which is how do you select poems for your chapbook? So you want to continue on that for a moment? Talked about themes, and thank you. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so, yeah, for me, it's if I start to feel like I have a cluster either centering around a particular theme, like in that case, or a particular technique, like I have a number. I'm working on a chapbook right now, and all of the poems are written in two columns, and it's meant to be both read in each column and then left to right as well across columns. And
Is there a name for that form, by the way, Andrew?
Not that I know of specifically. I have seen a couple of examples of it. There's a Yusef Kubiniaka poem and then a poem by the author Stan Rice that I kind of was inspired by. But no, if I were to try to pursue that for a full-length piece, a full-length collection, 60 to 80 pages, I think it would burn the idea out. I think the poems would start to become fairly similar in feel and expression before it was done. Whereas if I'm looking for 20 pages of poetry in that form, I think I can still create a really strong variety within that set of constraints. And so, yeah, if I have a craft constraint, that's the other main thing that steers me towards it.
How about you, Angela?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what Andrew's saying about the fact that some things can't be sustained in a full-length collection, or you have some themes. And I think that so many calls for submissions are geared towards themed submissions that oftentimes as poets, we kind of clump our poetry together around certain topics. I know personally, I have a grouping of science and speculative fiction poetry that either made its way into my book or will become a future chapbook, kind of centered around Latinx futures in space. And then with my forthcoming chapbook, Fourth Generation Chicana Unicorn, I took from multilingual work and work that kind of centered around the theme of the first poem I wrote about that, which was titled Fourth Generation Chicana Unicorn. And so taking that initial poem and then kind of seeing what earlier work I had that really touched upon ancestry, belonging, multilingualism, and then what later work. So kind of having a snapshot of really different points in time for over the over 5 years that this work represents. Sorry, there's a siren outside. And also I started publishing the last couple of years, I starting to publish my work. So I think that those calls for submissions and seeing where my poems got published and then pulling from once poems were then available rights wise and everything to put them in a collection was very helpful.
That was going to be the next question. I'll circle back to that about publication. Okay, so we'll put a pin in that. Wendy, I wanted to get back to how do you select poems? How will you select poems for your chapbooks?
That's true. Well, when I selected for my collection, I basically selected first via form, which is sci-fi coup poems. That's my specialty. And as my book is called The Planets, so I decided on the outset I was going to write poems about each of the 9 planets of the solar system. And yes, I'm showing my age. I do believe there are 9 planets. But I had already written a lot of poems about the solar system in previous years. And so it was really more of a matter just filling in the blanks of the planets I had not written about yet for the book. For chapbooks, I still would like to strongly go in theme. I don't necessarily write specifically sci-fi coup anymore. I have been expanding to more literary themes and using different forms for my poetry. So I'm actually thinking I'd like to put together a literary poetry collection about my experience with Cushing's disease,
Mm,
because it was a very frightening thing. I almost died from it, and the recovery was very brutal, quite frankly, and it lasted several years. So I have a lot of material.
mhm.
Um, but I sometimes wonder if it might work out better as a chapbook than as a full collection, because as Andrew said, I think this particular theme, if it went too long, it might be overwhelming for the reader. And frankly, I don't know if I could write that many poems, because revisiting that time period is still very painful to me.
Mhm, mhm.
But I still would like to write about it, because I think it's a topic that there's not a lot out about the experience, because it's such a rare disease. And I really feel it's important to get something out. And I do want to explore it via poetry and not just a memoir of some kind. Maybe do a hybrid of the two. Um,
So
but
I
I
want to,
also, oh, I'm sorry, Kua. I
no,
didn't mean to.
sorry. I just wanted us to return to and not lose for the audience the idea of whether you are, almost everyone seems in agreement about thematic focus. That's not necessarily the only way, but
Oh,
I wanted you to share with the audience whether or not uh, previous published works are important. Okay, because that
oh,
came up in conversation. And I have many of my questions are from people who asked, how do I do a chapbook? One of the recurring ones is, does the work need to have been, and I'm going to do air quotes, proven by being previously published or new? So I wanted you all to respond to, are you including previously published work? Would it be all new work? And what's the percentage or balance for you in your work in doing this? And I'll start with Wendy so she can finish her thought. Because if you're going to do a chapbook on Cushing's, this is all new work for you. Will you wait until some of them have been published before you do your book? And then we'll go around the
I
circle.
actually think it's a proven idea that you should have a percentage of published work in every book project that you do. But you should always include new work too, because people could follow you as a poet and be reading that. Why do they need to buy your book if there's nothing new in it? But conversely, it's good to have things that are already published, because that markets the book too, because they can see it and then want to come and read more things. So I think it's always good to have a combination. But I tend to think published versus unpublished, I tend to skew the published smaller. I know some people put in almost 50% or even more of pre-published. I really like to keep it around 20%, just enough that they can look at it outside, but if they buy the book, they get something they don't see anywhere else.
Mm,
And even in my own book, there's 12 poems that I've selected that I do in readings or I've put out into the world, and everything else just isn't seen except if they buy my book. And I think for chapbooks, I think that's kind of an important thing too. I don't know if you necessarily should do a chapbook only of your published work. To me, that seems to defeat the purpose, but maybe people have other opinions.
Angela?
Yeah, I mean, this can go a number of different ways, right? If you're just starting out as a poet, it helps to get some work out published, especially if you want to go self-publishing route or make a zine of some kind of your work to share with friends and those who want to get to know and engage with your work. But I also know that some of the calls for submissions for chapbook specifically might ask that a certain percentage, and they might give you that number so you have
Mhm.
less less of a decision in that way. I think for
Yes.
me, it helped to have some previously published both in my full-length book and the chapbook because I was getting established as a poet, and I don't think it would have been the best route to just throw out into the universe a full-length collection without having gotten to know the different speculative fiction journals, gotten to know folks with those journals, and then once the book was published, I contacted editors. I let them know, and that was a great way of sharing the news about my work and encouraging those who might already be invested and interested in your work to continue reading it in a full-length collection or in a chapbook, because I think they do ultimately have different audiences, especially with availability, whether you're publishing everything online or you really want to have that bound print book that yourself or somebody else has made for you.
Great points. Andrew.
So yeah, I would answer it a couple different ways. We started at the beginning with a fairly flexible definition of what a chapbook is. If we want to talk about something that's purely self-produced, or you're printing it up, you're binding it yourself, either, even just stapling it and folding it, handing it out at readings, I would say that that's the kind of informal introduction to your work that honestly I don't think needs to be published. So if you are doing that, if you're just a poet who's just trying to get your feet underneath you, trying to build your initial audience and see how people react, I think, I think that's actually a fabulous way to start talking with an audience and building connections to help learn about how people are responding to your work. That being said, I'll definitely say I've always leaned more towards the direction of things like, a published push put out by presses and things like that. And, most presses are going to prefer a book that at least has some proof of concept. With the full-length collection, of course, it is extraordinarily difficult to get a solid publisher who's going to back your work with a largely unpublished manuscript. I think, my first book had about 35%, maybe 35 to 40%. I'd say that's not a bad number. Some folk will look actually for 50%. There's actual presses that would prefer that. And then there's some that'll say, as long as there's like, a good chunk of really strong poems in here, then that's cool. With the chapbook, one thing I like about them is that even when it comes to reaching out to a press that will bind and create a really polished looking chapbook for you, I feel like you don't need, kind of like Wendy said, I feel like you don't need nearly as many of them published. I think with the chapbook, your theme and the cohesion of the book sells the book easier than the percentage of publication does. So if the book itself has a really clear and marketable, and I hate to use that word talking about craft, but if it has a clear and marketable identity, a press is going to have an easier time getting behind it and being able to explain to their established audience what this book is.
You are such, you're my segue king, okay? Because I wanted to ask next about how you organize your collection. Is it through a narrative thread, some kind of storyline? Is it by geography, by time, by I Ching? And I don't say that as a joke. I know someone who organized their collection using the I Ching. So let's start again with Angela. How did you organize your collection? What was your schema for organizing your poems?
Yeah, so for the chapbook that's forthcoming later this year, I organized the poems. It was a small grouping of poems. I think there's a little over a dozen or so to work with. So I kind of looked into how they connected with each other. Like I said earlier, I had a collection of work that really spanned 5 or so years. And so I was putting poems in conversation with each other that were temporally distant. So it was neat to kind of see what connected with different parts of the poems or different parts of the collection. I think it was nice too, in talking about unpublished work, to have some maybe shorter poems that might be unique to the collection in the sense that it really touches on the theme in the opening and closing of the collection, to have something tying together. So maybe not necessarily naming the sections, but then having these different poems delineating the sections that might be unpublished and then unique to the overall cohesion of the collection. With my longer collection, I guess geography might be a good way of putting it, because it starts on Earth and thinking about future space travelers and the different challenges they might face. We kind of start with humans experiencing the Anthropocene on Earth, and then later moving outwards from Earth and eventually kind of into this distant future and the very speculative questions of how we will survive, and then I end with a kind of coda, thinking about my own process of writing this piece during the pandemic. So different ways of naming sections or kind of leaving the reader to find their way through the work through maybe unnamed but kind of marked poems.
I love certain words you said. I want to just highlight them, not just because I like them, but I hope the audience heard her talk about having poems in conversation with each other. That's, I think, a really wonderful thing to do. And also her fabulous idea of a coda, a wrap up, but done poetically, and that she didn't name sections. Wendy, you want to chat about your organization strategy or schema?
Yeah, I guess so.
You don't have to, but I know
Well,
you have something to
to be
say.
honest, I do have several books of poetry in the works, but each one kind of has a different scheme to it.
Mhm.
I have another sci-fi coup book that I'd like to get out called Time and Space, which is going to feature sci-fi coup about the universe and spatial concepts. So it'll be a little bit of time travel, it'll be a bit of that. And for that book, not only will all the poems be sci-fi coup, like my first book, um, they will be on this specific theme. And I am going to probably organize it also by the type of space and space time kind of thing. So I'm not sure if I'm going to put the technology section first and then do space and then do the time travel or whatever. I have to see how the flow is of the poems. So they're not decided, and I know I have holes in there that I still have to write some poems to fill. But that book is getting close to being done, to be perfectly honest. I have the Cushing's project, which has very little written, just maybe 2 or 3 poems, so it's a long way off. And for that, I'm probably going to organize it by the progress of the disease and what I went through in my recovery. So poems about the discovery of the diagnosis, the
So
denial,
chronologically.
the trauma, and then yeah. So I think that one will be more chronological
Mhm.
just because in that case it makes most sense to me as the person that experienced it. And I think as a reader, it might make more sense too, because they will understand a process that they may be going through as well. But for other things, I sometimes just like to pick a theme and I'll put a really strong poem at the beginning, and usually I like to finish with a strong poem. And in the middle, it's just kind of developing a flow. I liked your idea of an I Ching to develop. That is, I think that's pretty cool, actually.
It's not
Um,
a funny idea, but I
that
I
there's
I
really
liked it. I liked it too.
I don't really think there's any one way to do a poetry collection or chapbook, just simply because we're all different as poets. Our poetry is all different, and it just has to make sense to you
Oh,
as the
that's what I'm
poet.
hoping the audience is getting. So I want to hear
Yeah.
other ways to do it. So Andrew,
Mhm.
So, there's a number, like all these questions, there's a lot of different answers I could give. My first chapbook, Easy to Lose, The Conversations with the Frog, was, fairly autobiographical. It traced a very specific period of my life that also happened to coincide with, significant personal growth and change. And so that one admittedly was largely chronological.
Mm, mm,
Basically, there was a stable speaker, and that speaker had a clear sense of dynamics across the poems so that they were different in point of view than they were at the beginning. And so that
ah,
one benefited from a linear growth. My collection, The Goats Have Taken Over the Barracks, is divided in half. The first half is about a stable speaker, but who has undergone a series of major losses. it has some autobiographical elements, but actually a lot of it is fictionalized. I wrote poems to reflect different angles of examining loss. And then in the second half, that same speaker basically rebuilds themselves on the foundation of a discovery of heritage. In this case, it was largely inspired by my travels in Croatia, which is where half my family comes from. And that's also where the eponymous title comes from. There was a literal barracks in the village that my mother grew up in that had been taken over by goats after its abandonment. And so there was a lot of image of natural rebirth and regrowth. So for that one, it was divided into halves. And then even though the poems were in no way sequential, the arrangement was meant to deliver that sense of there is something of a narrative taking place here. Now, I'll contrast that, though, against what I'm doing now. My current collection is called Fighting Fermi, referring to the physicist Enrique Fermi and his theory of the great filters, the Fermi paradox of why we haven't found alien life. And the poem is broken up into 5 stages, which is...
Haven't? Are you sure? No, I'm sorry, go on. I was just...
You're fine. But no, it's broken up into 5 sections. Each one has a title related to a stage of grief. And then each section has 9 poems, one for each of Fermi's predicted filters. And, basically the idea, the large theme of the collection is it's like a preemptive grieving for a potential end of the world if the human race hits one of those filters. So that one had a much more idea-driven structure where the overarching structure is the governing principle behind the content of a lot of the poems.
Thank you. Excellent, all of you. And again, audience, I'm not trying to reach consensus here at all. I want to make sure you understand that. And I think Andrew and Wendy in particular just illustrated how as their interests, concerns, and creations change, their strategies for organizing have changed. So no one's saying stuck in a particular way of doing it. Next is oh my gosh, time flies so fast. All right, but folks need to hear about this. How were your chapbooks published? Were they self-published or published by a press? And Angela?
Yeah, so my chapbook coming out, 4th Generation Chicana Unicorn, will be published by Dancing Girl Press, which publishes a lot of works by female identified poets. And so the process there, I think that's the point where a lot of people going into now I want to publish this can find some challenges where you're dealing with submission fees, you're dealing with, long wait times to hear back about your chapbook. So I think that can be the most challenging part in the process, is just figuring out a place that's going to really appreciate your work, get back to you and work with you on editing the collection, producing cover art, and things of that nature. So it's helpful that we have pages like the Science Fiction Fantasy Poetry Association's list of publication venues, which include where to publish chapbooks and full-length collections, and then other sorts of guides online for where might you submit, how might you deal with submission fees, what are you personally willing to commit financially to this project, and just kind of finding your way through it. And as I understand, as poets continue publishing, they can kind of gain some momentum and more easily finding publishers as they go along, as they become more recognized. But it's definitely can be the most time-consuming part of the process.
Andrew, please.
So, my first chapbook was through Finishing Line Press. They're a hybrid publisher. And so, there is a real burden on the author to market the book through them. And you do have to do a lot of your own legwork. So that's one way in which, a chapbook can often cause you to sort of have to think about what you're willing to invest in it. Sometimes it's going to be things like submission fees or contest fees. Other times it's going to be knowing that you'll have to hustle it a little bit. That said, right now I have, as a side project, I'm also working on a chapbook of speculative poems. And that one I'm largely going to at least begin by looking for contests and things like that. And one thing I'll say though is, and this is kind of like that last question where different stages of where you're at in your writing will also partially dictate what you're going to be doing. In this case, for example, I have 2 novels coming out this year. I have a collection that I'm shaping. It's been a little bit shelved to get those novels out, but I'm going to be really pushing that out to presses and things like that over the next year. So that's given me a lot of leeway with this chapbook, which I think is I'm actually really excited about this one. It's my first real foray into like fully speculative poetry. But one thing that's honestly I'm kind of lucky about right now is in terms of getting my work out there, I have these other pieces that I can focus on to sort of be the thing that's building an audience. And I can submit the chapbook to 5 contests and then wait a year to hear back on them. And I'm going to lose nothing from that. But that's because I'm trying to utilize where I'm at right now. If I was back where I was when I published the chapbook through the hybrid press, and I really had to, I was doing open mics, I was, trying to travel as much as I could at the time, I'd do it all over again because that's exactly what I needed to be doing at
the
that
time.
point to get my work out there.
Wendy, again, how was your book published? And maybe what do you intend for your chapbooks? Will it be published by a self-publishing or by a press?
Well, first off, this is the latest effort I just did, my Anaheim Poetry Review. It's a community chapbook of poetry. And I did it all myself. I was the publisher. I hired a press, had a beautiful cover put on it. They have this wonderful coding. I just love it. They did such a great job. Um, but I don't know if I necessarily would do another collection of poetry myself. A chapbook, I think I would. I would feel more comfortable keeping the creative control of it because for a chapbook, for me, it's more of a marketing thing. I was thinking I'd create a inexpensive chapbook of my poetry. I'd narrate it. I could then sell it as an album and as a book. So there's many possibilities for me if I do it myself. When you publish through a publisher, they take a lot of control and yet still expect you to do the 9 yards of all the marketing. And I don't like that. I would prefer to do it myself. But there is one caveat. A lot of the awards that are out there, if you are not published by a small press or traditional publisher, you're not eligible. And that is the one reason why I might seek out a publisher for my next small book of poetry, either the collection or maybe some of my larger chapbooks. And it's a big thing. I did not realize this when I did my debut collection of poetry, and I ended up missing out on a lot of places I could have submitted it to for that reason. Although I also submitted it in 2020, and a lot of places, of course, shut down. So I didn't really get the full experience with it anyway. Although it did get nominated for an Elgin, so I mean that's fine. And like I said, it was the reason I got hired as a poet laureate. So I definitely got my mileage out of my first book. But yeah, I really think that those of you who are listening, consider finding a small press publisher for your first book. There really are a lot of opportunities for your first book that you never see again in your career as a poet.
Subsequent ones. Yep.
Yes, and so I would even be hesitant to publish your first book of poetry until you examine all of these angles and that you understand them. Because, I mean, there's really some really big money prizes out there for a debut book. And once you're published, like I am now a published book, I can't do all these things. I kind of rob myself of it.
1 second, Wendy.
So don't do what I did.
It's we have 6 minutes left, and I want to encourage the attendees to put any questions in the chat box because this could really be a multi-hour discussion. We can go on, and Wendy has brought up so many wonderful other they're essential and tangential concerns, um, in terms of, we've touched briefly on organizing, on deciding when, but now when you get to how do you get it published, there's so much that goes with that. And so I'll start again with Wendy, um, because, and you mentioned this in passing, because I don't see questions yet, and people would want to know, how did you handle self-publishing? And Andrew suggested this also. Self-publishing has these decision points that you must address, that having a publisher do, you don't have to address. And in some ways that's liberating and lightening. In other ways, it's a lack of control. So I think it's in part about who you are, what you are. But how did you handle, Wendy, layout, book cover, design, and editing?
I did it all myself. But I am I mean, I'm a former television producer. I've done graphic design in the past with clients. This is not everything was not exactly new to me. And frankly, learning to format a book, I took a couple of tutorials. I think I did a credible job. But looking back now at my first book, I see things I would do differently. But that's through the eyes of more experience. But it, like I said, it was nominated twice for an Elgin. I don't think it did all that bad. So I'm not worried about that. But the thing is, there is a lot of work involved in putting together a physical book. There is a reason you want to pay experts to do this for you. You need to decide what you want to learn yourself and take care of it yourself for budget reasons, and those things that you want to farm out. To be perfectly honest, I don't know if I would necessarily illustrate my own books. I did do Anaheim Poetry Review myself on Canva, which is a wonderful program. I encourage you to use it. I did do the cover. Let's see. No, I did not do the cover for The Planets, which I think I had. Yep, I do right here. This book is my debut collection, and I actually hired a designer for the cover of this book, and I think she did a wonderful job.
I like it.
Yeah, so I
I've got
mean,
it.
oh, that's true, you do. But these are decisions I make for each project. Sometimes I feel comfortable enough doing some of the illustrations. For instance, in the planets, there's also line art in the book, which I did myself, but I've been selling my artwork on the art scene for 25 years. So, I mean, these are things that I know that I can do
You've already got that bucket of skills
I
to
did,
do
but
that.
there was training. I've been trained to do the marketing. I've been trained to do everything possible as a small press. I could be a small press with no problem for other people. Not that I'm asking anyone, please don't call me.
Oh, then
But
don't put it
I
out
mean,
there.
but
Because
anybody can learn these skills. Anyone can.
I say that because that was another good segue. We have a question, and the question is, um, do y'all have any publishers you might recommend to send speculative chapbooks, or know of any good resources to find a good variety of these publishers? Who would like to answer that?
Well, you could always send it to the publisher I work for as an editor, Dimensionfold. He does
There's one,
take
folks.
on books too. He has a stable of poets who he publishes their chapbooks and poetry collections for.
Say it again, please, Wendy. It's Dimension
Dimensionfold. Dimension FOLD.com. Yes. I know it's an odd name, but I work for the dude and he's a nice guy, so I like him. So I want to give him a plug. But I mean, there are others. I believe there's one called Interstellar Press out there. You could check the yes.
Holly Lynn Walrat's group.
Mhm.
Yes.
But yeah, there's all kinds of them out there. But I'm sorry.
Any others, Angela?
Somebody else.
Yeah, I just posted the link to the SFPA list of speculative poetry.
Thank you.
publishers.
I
And
was
of course, there's
confused.
others. You know, more literary genre magazines might, you know, take you up on a speculative collection. I know that Red Ogre Review has, I think their reading period is happening now for specifically speculative poetry chapbooks. And then I
Say
have,
again, who?
Red Ogre Review.
Red Oak?
Ogre.
Oh, Red Ogre. Red Ogre.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I published mine with Hiraith Books, so I didn't have to take care of the cover. It was done for me, and some of the formatting as well. I think the biggest takeaway I hope folks get from this is knowing that it is attainable to publish a chapbook or first collection, right? There's many ways of going about it.
Absolutely.
And you know, as a high school poet years ago, I didn't necessarily see myself going in this direction, but I wanted to, and I'm really glad to have found the people and skills and publishers to make that happen.
Andrew?
So the first thing I would have also posted is the exact link that Angela posted. I
Me
actually
too.
have that open in a browser tab right now. I always do because I go back through it to make sure I'm keeping work out there.
Mhm.
So the biggest advice I'd give, and anybody who's in here in this room right now has already got to start on this, is that to start participating in writing communities that can also link you to venues and outlets that are calling for work. So just for example, recently I've joined the Discords for magazines for you know, of course, Dream Foundry, for Ghoulish Times, for the Dread Machine, and they're fantastic supportive communities. And one of the things that they do is they call everyone's attention to, hey, I just saw this call to write, I saw this call for chapbooks. And then, of course, honestly, good old-fashioned Google is always your friend as well. That's where a lot of the venues I found. There's also resources like Authors Publish, that is a blog that sends you like a weekly email, I think it is, that just lists. It's usually it's kind of random in a way, but like every month I'll get at least one email that's got a list of publishers that have a call for books. Maybe the next week I'll get something about speculative magazines. The week after, themed calls for submission. But basically, just tuning yourself into as many sources of ongoing news and awareness is absolutely the best tool you can use.
In addition to SFPA, I want to mention Submission Grinder and also Submittable. And because both of those have links of calls for chapbooks, that's steady, ready, and always, always there.
I think Duotrope too, Apu.
Yeah.
Except the only reason I didn't mention Duotrope, and maybe the panel can enlighten me, I thought Duotrope had fees.
Yeah.
It's
They
$5
do.
a month, I think.
It does, right. So I always try to start with naming those places that are free and available.
Well, I
And
think as a publisher, I guess I think of Duotrope because it's free for me, but Submittable charges me. It's the other way around.
it's the other way around. And and
Yeah.
Submittable is free for submissions, and
For
you
the
can
submission,
be
for the
served.
people to read. Mhm.
I had wanted us to talk about, preparation and acknowledgments page. I wanted to get in the weeds a little bit, but we're past our time. So I will now go around and ask each of the panelists if they have any last thoughts. And I'll start with Angela.
Yeah, just like I said, you know, this is an attainable process. There's people here to help you, and I think it's really wonderful that the speculative poetry community continues growing, so that people are publishing genre chapbooks and full-length collections so regularly.
Andrew?
One of my favorite things about chapbooks is that they do tend to have like a strong sense of cohesion, and that also, I think, especially when we talk about speculative chapbooks, also makes them more entertaining, I think, than some chapbooks are. And I think that's really important right now. I think there's a big demand for poetry that both enlightens and entertains. And speculative fiction, I think, speculative poetry is actually really growing right now, and it's an opening market, and it's really good to be a part of those before they get cluttered and clogged up. So otherwise, I think Angela's message is the best. It's attainable. You can do it. It's just making it happen.
Wendy?
Well, I think I also agree with Angela. There's no time like the present to get out there and put your work out. The speculative community is very welcoming, both from the publisher and small press end to the actual poets themselves. Come and join us. It's always great to have new people to join our ranks, so to speak, and we all look forward to seeing what you can do.
Well, thank you all for speaking, talking, sharing, enlightening, inspiring, encouraging. And thank you all who are listening for being here. And thank you to Flights of Foundry for enabling this kind of conversation. I think it's really important. And it's the kind of thing I didn't get and would have relished. So I hope you are enjoying it with the same relish and delight that I am just to hear these words spoken by these wonderful creators. Be well and enjoy the rest of the conference.